They called her the keeper of her bloodline, but behind closed doors, she became its destroyer. A grandmother who defied every law of nature, crossing the most forbidden boundary carrying her own grandson's child. This is no ordinary tale. It's a warning whispered across generations. Before we dive in, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a chilling story from the past. And tell me, do you believe family loyalty should have limits? To understand the horror of what came later, you must first see the world she ruled. The village itself was small, tucked deep into a countryside where forests pressed against farmland and dirt roads dissolved into mud each spring. Life there moved slowly, yet every eye and ear seemed to belong to someone else. Secrets were hard to keep, but traditions were harder to break. At the center of this world stood the family estate, an aging house of wood and stone, perched just beyond the reach of town. The shutters were always closed, the smoke from its chimney thick and constant, as if even the house itself was afraid of the outside world. And inside, at the head of the table, ruled the matriarch. She was not a woman of softness. Neighbors remembered her sharp eyes, always narrowing, as though she saw sins no one else dared admit. Her voice carried authority, like the toll of a church bell, loud, final, and impossible to ignore. She had buried her husband years before, but his absence did not weaken her. If anything, it strengthened her hold. Land, livestock, and lineage all belonged to her, and she guarded them as though they were extensions of her own flesh. Her children learned quickly that obedience was survival. To disobey her meant humiliation at best, punishment at worst. Even in their adulthood, when most would leave to build homes of their own, they remained under her roof. Some claimed it was loyalty. Others whispered it was fear. And as for her grandchildren, those born into her grasp, they never knew a childhood free of her shadow. Their games were silenced, their laughter discouraged. Every step they took was watched, every word measured. She believed herself the keeper of their souls, the guardian of family purity. But in truth, she was laying the stones for something far darker. A prison disguised as a home. It was here, in this oppressive world, that the seeds of silence took root. No one dared question her authority, not even the men of the church, who nodded politely and avoided her eyes. She was both respected and feared, and perhaps even envied. Because in a time when women were often voiceless, she ruled without question. But power without limits corrodes. And soon, her desire for control would stretch beyond discipline, beyond tradition, beyond morality itself. The villagers sensed something unnatural in that house, that they had no proof, only instinct. They would say to their children, "Don't wander past her gates, don't meet her gaze too long, and don't ever cross her will." For the matriarch believed she was untouchable. And perhaps that belief, more than anything else, was what allowed her to cross the line no one should ever dare to cross. The matriarch's home was more than a house. It was a fortress of obedience, sealed by fear and silence. Her children had grown into adults, yet none truly escaped her grasp. Some worked the fields, others tended to the animals, but all returned to her table each night. Every decision, no matter how small, was subject to her approval. Marriage proposals were denied if she disapproved, friendships severed if she suspected disloyalty. Even love, the one thing no parent can control, became a weapon in her hands. She believed herself the keeper of family blood, but her obsession with purity twisted into something monstrous. She blurred the line between generations, demanding reverence from her children, while simultaneously treating them as tools to serve her will. And then there were the grandchildren. To the outside world, they should have been her joy. Innocent, eager, full of laughter. But inside the estate, they were possessions, extensions of her power, molded to her image. She dictated when they spoke, how they dressed, even how they carried themselves. To cross her was to invite punishment, delivered not always with a hand, but with words sharp enough to carve scars into the soul. Among these grandchildren, one boy drew her attention more than the rest. Perhaps it was because he looked like the husband she had lost. Perhaps it was his quiet nature, his desperate need to please her. Or perhaps, in her warped mind, he represented the continuation of the family legacy she believed only she could protect Dot at first. It seemed like favoritism the way she lingered near him, the way she singled him out for praise, while others endured criticism. The boy, desperate for approval, responded as any child would. He obeyed. But obedience under her gaze was not rewarded with freedom. It was rewarded with chains. He grew up knowing nothing beyond her rules, his world defined by her approval and her wrath. Friends from outside the estate were forbidden. Schooling was limited, monitored, sometimes denied. He became not just her grandson, but her creation molded into silence, conditioned into loyalty. And as the years passed, the whispers within the family deepened. The roles between grandmother and grandson blurred. The line between authority and obsession began to dissolve. What should have been a bond of love and protection transformed into something unnatural, something unspeakable. But inside those walls, silence ruled. No child dared question her. No adult dared intervene. And in the darkness of that silence, something monstrous was allowed to grow. For when fear becomes law, and silence becomes tradition, the unthinkable is no longer impossible. It began. As many horrors do, with whispers. At first, the villagers noticed only the strangeness of the boy, how he seldom spoke, how he rarely ventured beyond the estate's gates. When he did appear in town, it was always in her shadow, his eyes lowered, his words measured. To outsiders, he seemed less a grandson than a servant, bound to her will. But within the house, the atmosphere shifted. The other children began to sense it. The way she lingered near him, the way her hand rested too long on his shoulder, the way she demanded his company above all others. Affection, once the rarest currency in her household, was now lavished on one boy alone. And then silence grew heavier. Doors were closed more often. Certain rooms were kept locked. The boy's bed was moved, inexplicably, closer to hers. For those living under her roof, suspicion curdled into dread, but fear kept their tongues still. Who would dare accuse the matriarch? Who would risk her wrath? When the truth could no longer be denied, it arrived in the most grotesque form. She was pregnant. The villagers, upon seeing her swelling frame, recoiled. She was far beyond the age of ordinary motherhood, yet her body bore unmistakable signs. At first, explanations were offered, whispers of illness, rumors of miraculous late fertility, lies spun by those too frightened to confront reality. But the truth seeped out like rot through the walls. Her grandson, the boy who had never known freedom, was the father. It was an abomination that shattered every natural law. The bond meant to protect had been twisted into a curse. The family bloodline, once preserved at all costs, had turned against itself in the most unholy of ways. Neighbors avoided the estate entirely. Some crossed themselves when her name was spoken. Others insisted that the land itself had become cursed, that the soil beneath her house would no longer yield without punishment. And yet, inside those walls, the matriarch showed no shame. To her, the pregnancy was not scandal, but proof of her power. She claimed it as destiny, as if the world itself had chosen her to carry the future of her own bloodline. For the grandson, there was no escape. He bore the weight of guilt without ever truly understanding choice. He was trapped victim, participant, and prisoner all at once. The household fell into deeper silence. Children averted their eyes. Adults dared not speak. And the matriarch, swollen with the child of her grandson, ruled more fiercely than ever. The forbiddens had become flesh. And soon, That flesh would be born into a world that wanted nothing to do with it. The night the child was born, the estate fell into an eerie stillness. No midwife from the village was summoned. No doctor dared cross her threshold. The birth was conducted in secret, behind shuttered windows and locked doors, with only the trembling hands of her daughters to assist. The cries of labor were muffled by heavy cloth and hushed prayers. When at last the child entered the world, it was not welcomed with celebration, but with dread. For those present, the infant was not a blessing. It was a curse made flesh. Its first cry, thin and piercing, echoed through the house like an omen. The villagers claimed they heard it. Some swore the wind carried the wail across the fields, chilling them to their bones. Others said they saw the lights of the estate flicker, as though the house itself resisted the child's arrival. From the moment of birth, the child lived in shadows. There were no christenings, no public acknowledgments, no gatherings of kin to welcome new life. Instead, the baby was hidden away, kept behind closed doors, its existence denied beyond the estate's walls. To the village, it was as if no child had been born at all. But within the family, the infant became a symbol of everything broken. The matriarch treated it as her triumph, parading it through the house with pride, declaring it proof of her power. To her, the child was not a sin, but a continuation of the bloodline she alone controlled. The others, however, could not look at the baby without fear. Some whispered it was born with features too sharp, too uncanny, a blending of generations never meant to mix. Others believed its silence between cries was unnatural, as if even the infant knew it was not meant to exist. Rumors grew that the child was sickly, its body frail, its eyes clouded with something not quite right. Perhaps it was nature's judgment, perhaps just chance, but either way, it carried the weight of whispers before it could even walk. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the child seemed to vanish. Some say it died in infancy, its body buried in an unmarked grave at the edge of the property, mourned only by the night itself. Others claim it lived, hidden away from sight, raised as another child of the household, its true parentage buried beneath lies and silence. What became of the child remains uncertain. What is certain is this: its brief existence left scars that never healed. For the family, it was a ghost that haunted every meal, every glance, every silence. For the villagers, it was proof that evil could take root in flesh and blood. And for the matriarch, it was her legacy, the twisted crown she wore proudly. Even as the world recoiled from her, the child of shadows had entered the world. And from that moment forward, the family's name would forever be tangled with horror. What the matriarch believed to be triumph quickly became the poison that rotted her empire from within. Her children, once silent out of fear, began to fracture beneath the weight of shame. Some abandoned the estate altogether, fleeing under cover of night and never returning. Others stayed, but only as ghosts, avoiding her gaze, avoiding the child, avoiding each other. The bonds of family, once bound tight by her control, now unraveled strand by strand. Not the grandson her chosen, her victim carried the heaviest burden. His face grew hollow, his eyes sunken with despair. Though he still obeyed, it was no longer with the eagerness of a boy, but the resignation of a prisoner. The whispers followed him wherever he went. To the villagers, he was marked forever, not merely as her grandson, but as the unwilling father of her child. Outside the estate, the community reacted with cruelty, cloaked in superstition. Farmers claimed their crops withered whenever her shadow passed across their fields. Mothers pulled their children close, warning them never to linger near her gates. Some refused to even speak her name aloud, fearing that doing so might summon her curse. And indeed, strange misfortunes seemed to cluster around her land. Livestock sickened without reason. A fire consumed part of the barn one summer, though no lightning struck, no candle tipped. Neighbors swore they saw figures in her windows long after the lamps were extinguished, shapes that did not match the bodies living inside. Whether these tales were truth or punishment born of fear, one thing was certain. Her family name had become a stain. No alliance, no marriage, no friendship could wash it clean. Bloodlines that once prided themselves on purity now recoiled at her touch. The matriarch, however, did not bend. She doubled down, ruling with a fury greater than ever. She forbade her children from speaking of the past, silenced any attempt at rebellion, and treated the child of shadows as the center of her world. To her, this was not collapse, it was destiny, but the cracks in her empire grew wider each year. One daughter hanged herself in the attic, unable to endure the shame. Another son vanished without a trace, though villagers claimed they found his boots near the riverbank. And the grandson, once her prized possession, became a hollow man, consumed by guilt, crushed beneath the weight of sins he never chose. The estate, once a place of order and control, grew heavy with grief and decay. The shutters stayed closed, the fields lay fallow, and laughter never returned to its halls. What was once a dynasty had become a mausoleum, a monument to silence and sin. Her legacy did not stretch forward, as she believed. It folded inward, collapsing under the very weight of the power she thought eternal. And yet, even as everything around her withered, the matriarch remained unbroken in spirit, clinging to her belief that she alone carried the family's destiny, even if it meant dragging it into the grave with her. When the matriarch's body finally failed her, there was no grand funeral, no procession of mourners, no solemn hymns sung by the village choir. Her death was met with silence, just as her life had demanded silence from everyone around her. Some whispered relief, others whispered curses. A few, too afraid to speak even in her absence, remained quiet, as if her shadow might still be listening. The estate began to crumble without her iron hand. Her surviving children scattered, eager to outrun the weight of their surname. Some married into distant families under new identities. Others drifted, rootless, unable to build a life unchained from their past. The grandson, the one most tightly bound to her, vanished from the record altogether. No grave bears his name. No document tells of his fate. As if he, too, had been erased by the silence she enforced. Yet, even in erasure, the story lingered. The villagers told it in whispers, their voices trembling by the fire. Mothers warned their children never to cross the estate's ruins, saying the soil was tainted with sins too dark to name. Men sitting in taverns after long workdays swore that at night you could still hear the faint cry of a child drifting through the fields, thin, haunting, and directionless, like a ghost searching for a cradle. Written traces were rare, but not absent. An old journal found in a church archive referenced a household cursed by its own blood. A letter, penned by a neighboring farmer, spoke of a family who vanished under the weight of their own shame. Yet names were seldom given. The story was always cloaked in vagueness, as though naming the matriarch directly might resurrect her power. For generations, the tale survived as both folklore and warning. Was it a true account of one family's collapse, or had the villagers, horrified by whispers of incest, reshaped it into myth? No one could say for certain. But what mattered was the lesson it carried. Dot's silence had not destroyed the story. It had preserved it. Twisted, distorted, reshaped over time, yes, but alive. Passed down in firelight whispers, in crumbling notes, in the quiet terror that made locals cross themselves when the estate was mentioned. And so, while the matriarch's legacy of flesh crumbled, her legend endured. Not as she intended, not as a testament to power, but as a warning. A tale of what happens when fear protects sin, when silence buries truth, and when bloodlines turn against themselves. Even now, centuries later, the story survives in fragments, reminding us that some boundaries, once crossed, leave scars no grave can contain. And so, we arrive at the end of the tale of the matriarch who crossed every line. She sought to preserve her legacy, but in her obsession, she poisoned it. She silenced her children, enslaved her grandson, and birthed a child that embodied not just her blood, but her sin. Her house, once feared for its authority, became cursed by its own name. Her family scattered, her legacy collapsed, but her story endured. What lingers is not just the horror of what she did, but the chilling truth it reveals, that evil doesn't always come from strangers in the night. Sometimes it wears the face of family. Sometimes the monsters we fear most sit at our own tables, disguised as protectors, yet devouring what they were meant to protect. The villagers whispered her name as if it carried disease. They crossed themselves at the mention of her estate. And even now, centuries later, her shadow lives on, stitched into folklore, echoing through firelight tales meant to warn children of what silence can conceal. But what do we make of it today? Was she merely a twisted woman who manipulated her family into submission? Or is her tale the exaggerated product of gossip, sharpened by generations of fear? That, perhaps, is the most haunting part. We will never know where fact ends and legend begins. But we do know this: silence protects sin. And when silence becomes tradition, it can create horrors greater than any ghost dot. So I leave you with this question. If family is meant to protect, what happens when family itself becomes the danger? If you've stayed with me until now, you are among the brave few who dare to face the darkest shadows of history. Make sure to subscribe for more tales that others are too afraid to tell. Share this with someone who can handle the truth. And let me know in the comments, do you think this story was real? Or was it a legend meant to warn us of what happens when bloodlines turn against themselves? Until next time, remember, the past never stays buried.